thank you all for coming to this historic event. Historic, why? Because it's the first salon in a series of many, many salons. This was the dream of Emily Squires. And Diane Williams, our fearless leader, helped make it possible. Salons that bring people together for fundraisers and to discuss important issues and take action on issues such as environmental issues and social issues. Some thank yous are definitely in order. Jane Janu, a friend indeed. Where is Jane Janu? Jane stepped up and said, use me. I'm here to work for you. I'm here to help. Whatever you want me to do, I'll do it. And she did. She was a great help. God bless you, Jane. Thank you for being such a friend. And Gail Horton. Where's Gail? Hi, Gail. Gail stepped up and said, you know what? I'm going to make this place look and feel like Emily Squires did it. I'm going to arrange things and get the cutlery just the way it should look and get this there and that there and create this aesthetic and this organization the way Emily Squires would do it. And I said, yeah, pretty tall. That's a high bar. Like Emily Squires would have done it? Wow. Are you sure you want to take that on? Oh, look what she did. She did it. It's amazing. She did it. Our fearless leader, Diane Williams. I have notes. I don't want to botch up any of these details, so indulge me. I'm going to read this. Diane Williams, president of the Source of Synergy Foundation, of which Emily was the secretary since its beginning. Diane and Emily had a great and loving relationship. They were true partners in creating change in the world, especially around their mutual passion to connect people for the board of Source of Synergy Foundation, aspired to continue Emily's vision of salons that bring people together in synergy to raise the level of public discourse around significant global issues. Our godmother, our leader, Diane Williams. Where is she? Where's Diane? No more to go then.
What's that?
I have a little more to go.
Oh, you have a little more to go.
Sorry. Diane's going to be up very short. You know, there are many moments in our lives that we don't pay attention to. We don't think they're such a big deal. And then later on, somehow, you lose someone, or for some reason, you start thinking about these moments and realize that they're precious and cherished. Let me share with you, if I don't cry, some moments, a particular moment with Emily Squires. Every once in a while, out of the blue, she'd stop what she was doing. She'd come over to me and go, "You just love me." It was so adorable. It was so sweet. It was so loving. It was so childlike. It was so so don't you just love me? Oh yes, sweetheart. How could I not love you? Everybody who knows you loves you. She was a love. You know, she was noble, she was brilliant, she was loving, she was the best of friends, the best wife a man could hope for. And she's here! Yeah. She's here right now. She wouldn't miss this for the world. She's a little embarrassed because of all the attention. But she's grateful that we've all come together to honor her. And she loves you. She can't not love you, as you can't not love her. God bless us all. Oh! The great and wonderful Diane Williams.
Welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming. And when Len was speaking, I was just reminiscing about all the times that many of us in this room strategized and organized and planned and had salons in this living room with Emily and Len and so many of our friends. So it's really wonderful to be back and with all of you, and just very appreciative to Len and Gail and Jane And the Source of Synergy board, I wanted them to stand up, but they're all standing up to be recognized because they work very hard as well on this program, but on all the programs that we do. So let me try to acknowledge them quickly. We have Rick Olpick back there. And Denise Gatto and Moldau, who did a lot, along with Gail Colton. Gail Colton is not here tonight, but she really helped a lot with organizing this program behind the scenes. And Nina Meyerhoff. And Ann Hughes. Steve Constantine. Pamela Kraft. And we don't have Ron Rubru or Ashok Gangadine with us, but we also
Gerard
and Gerard Sennehy. Hi, Gerard. Gerard's not here either. So anyway, I was asked to speak a little bit about the Source of Synergy Foundation, which is hosting this salon this evening. And the Source of Synergy Foundation is dedicated to creating opportunities for synergy in the world, and especially opportunities that help support the movement in consciousness, the movement for conscious evolution in the world. And the name Source of Synergy sort of says our whole mission, because when we talk about the source, we mean the source that's connected to all that was, all that is, and all that ever will be, that divine pure consciousness. And synergy is basically the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So we really try to merge the two, enter into the source and create synergy among all of us. And the Source of Synergy has various projects, one with our lovely Gregg and Bruce. It's called the Evolutionary Leaders Project. We started that with the Chopra Foundation and AG&T and a bunch of groups to really bring leaders together so we can work together, because most of the leaders were really on the cutting edge of consciousness. And we thought, let's bring them together in a collective and see what emerges. And sometimes it's been challenging. And one thing I wanted to recognize about Gregg and Bruce, the reason why I think so many of us love them so much, is because they never give up. Even with our group, they're so committed. They're so generous in their time, and they get the vision of why it's important to be a collective.
See, we don't see what's happening behind the scenes, that she's having a hard time.
Well, sometimes we try to start projects and they don't always manifest, those type of things. Because
those kinds of things.
Those type of things, and you have so many people. But they really believe in the vision, and they just keep hanging in there.
It's important.
We so appreciate, because any change is difficult, and even this type of social change. So these salons are in honor of Emily Squires, because Emily started these salons in June of last year, 2012. She did the first one here with Barbara Marks-Horvath, and I think a lot of you were here. Can you raise your hand if you came? So thank you. We're really building community among ourselves, and Emily believed in social synergy and evolutionary leadership and visionary change. So we said this is one concrete way that we can honor her memory, is by continuing the work that she started last year. So that's why we're so grateful to our two friends for supporting Emily's vision. And we plan on doing these on an ongoing way. And if anybody's interested in hosting a future salon, that would be wonderful. We're hoping these salons will have a life of their own. I know we already had a couple people. Is a lady from East Hampton here? Yes, you mentioned you have a restaurant. So
I would love to, yes.
Yeah, hosting, thank you. And
would you come to Connecticut?
Sure, yeah, we had that. And also Anne was thinking about doing one as well. So it would be wonderful if anybody's inspired to, thank you. So maybe you could just all leave us your contact information, and we'd be happy to plan something with you. Oh, and also I wanted to say that the proceeds, some of it will be going to Source of Synergy, but also Emily believed, basically her focus was on environment. We know that she was really concerned about fracking, and actually she'd be very happy to know that fracking, and she has a country place, Fernland, in Pennsylvania, and actually fracking was banned in that area. Emily worked really hard on that, so it's a great victory for her. So environment was one of her main passions. Animal rights was another passion, and the evolution of consciousness. So we decided to give a portion of the proceeds to 3 organizations that we know was close to her heart. One is FIONS. I know we have Emery Colvin here, who's the president of FIONS, and Kurt Johnson, who's the current president now, and Anne's on the board, and Vicki has been very involved, and Jane was a former president, and I'm sure many of others. I'm forgetting Rick, are you part now? You're co-vice president. Finance is one charity that we're giving to. And also, we're giving to the Nature Conservancy. Emily used to give funds to that. And to the Animal Sanctuary of New York for the Animal Rights Park. So the money is going to a good cause. So I wanted to now introduce our dear friends. And I didn't want to go to like a normal bio of how many books all those books on the table, those are books that they've written. I wanted to talk about more who they are as human beings, because anybody that knows Gregg and Bruce as a friend just is so touched by who they are as human beings. Even opening an email from them, and I know Deborah and others that get emails from them, is that you're just engulfed in love and appreciation, and they just make you feel good. And you know, I'm thinking, well, what is this? And I really think it's because they are living their spiritual message. That's who they are. They walk their talk with everybody they meet. And that's a very, very rare quality in a human being. And even with our evolutionary leaders group, they are the first ones to say, even before we say, can you make a contribution? He's writing a check, or he's saying, I can't come this year, can you please use the funds that I was going to use for somebody that can't afford it? Always meeting us with a hug, with a smile. It's just exceptional human beings. We're just very privileged to have them with us tonight for this official launch of the Source of Synergy Salons. And we hope you enjoy the evening, and we hope that we stay in touch. If we don't have your email, please make sure we have your email before we leave. So thank you. Thank you.
Everybody's looking at you. Realize they are. Our chairs are backwards. Well, first I want to thank everyone that's made this possible tonight. Diane, you were my first point of contact, you and Deborah. Lynn, I don't know where.
He's sitting there back here.
He just went. I told him I had his back when he had his back to me for this evening, and listening to both he and Diane, it's hard not to cry. And when I cry, my voice changes, and that's a whole different thing. So I'm like working to hold some of that back. But I'm very moved to be here tonight in Emily's home, in Lynn's home. Some of you I know very well, some I've never seen before. And so I'm honored to meet you all for the first time. And I'm especially honored to be here sharing this with my dear brother. You know I love this man. We've known each other almost 20 years now. We've toured all over the world together. We've toured all through Europe on a train. We've been to Australia. We're in our producer's motor taxi during the tour, and we toured ourselves. In a Volkswagen. In a Volkswagen in the outback with kangaroos. So we've known one another for a long time. And rarely do I co-present with anyone. I always say yes with Bruce because it makes sense. Because of the way our work has merged and even deeper, I think, over the years. So I know, how much time do we have? 15 minutes, okay. I'm going to talk really fast. I'm going to leave all the vowels out. Biblical Hebrew, easy to read. You know, Diane asked me to say a few words about our work in general and specifically some of the issues I think that draw you all together. I'm honored to be here with you as well because this is community, and community is so key in where we're going in the world right now. We have, Bruce and I have had the opportunity to be all over the world, not just in some of the biggest cities on the planet, but in some of the most isolated, remote, magnificent, beautiful, pristine places remaining in the world where our indigenous ancestors are witnessing a shift in the world that they have expected for a very long time. And many of them have done their best to tell the Western world that this shift was coming in a language that the Western world wasn't always quick to embrace. So from the indigenous and the ancient perspective, the changes that our world is going through, to them, they've made room for it in their lives because they allow for us to have a deep, nurturing relationship with cycles of time and cycles of nature, and that includes Earth and the Earth changes the Earth goes through. there's a dichotomy in the Western world, in the big cities and the large organizations, and we're both trained as scientists. Our degrees are in the sciences, the hard sciences. Science doesn't make room for the kinds of changes that our world is going through, and Western world doesn't allow for the cycles of change that we're witnessing right now. So when the world begins to shift and the things that we have grown accustomed to, the ways that we've come to master our lives and our world, when those things begin to change, to the Western world it means something is wrong, and they identify it as a time of crisis. So you are hearing in the Western news that we are living a time of crisis from the indigenous perspective. It is a time of change with the opportunity of transformation. The question is, as will we allow for the transformation that is at hand, and we're making that choice right now. So one of the places where I find this so interesting, the indigenous perspective, 5,000 years of indigenous wisdom. It's not scientific, but it is accurate, and it helps us to understand our relationship to ourselves, to life, to the earth, to the past, and the way we work together. Science is only about 300 years old, and the scientific perspective that you and I are all steeped in, and even if we've done so much work on our own to transcend our Western culture, Western traditions, we have all been steeped in the belief that we live in a world of struggle, a world of competition, survival of the strongest. We've all been told when we're kids we live in a dog-eat-dog world. And these ideas, they're not that we talk about them every day, but they're so much a part of our culture because science began to disseminate them in the 1800s, early 1900s. Our civilization is based upon these ideas of struggle, competition, survival of the strongest. The economic system that's breaking right now in the world is based upon survival of the strongest. The way we're trying to solve our problems in the Middle East, the way we're trying to solve the problems of diminishing resources. And the old thinking is no longer working. And the reason it's no longer working is because those beliefs are based, we now know, in principles that are false assumptions of science. Both Bruce and I talk about new discoveries. So these aren't our opinions or hypotheses or theories. It's peer-reviewed science has now overturned 300 years of traditional scientific thinking and is telling us that nature is actually based upon a model of cooperation and what biologists call mutual aid. And we all know competition happens, but it's not the rule, it's the exception. We now understand that life is not a random event. It is something very, very specific that happened, and the DNA is telling us this, that human life is not a random event. The fossil evidence is telling us this. Civilization is older than 5,000 years old. The archaeology is pushing advanced civilization, technologically advanced civilizations back into the end of the last ice age 13,000 years ago. All of this changes the way we think of ourselves, and it changes the way we go about solving our problems. So that's the good news. The flip side is there is a reluctance, and in some cases, a staunch resistance to sharing this in the mainstream. So you're not seeing this in mainstream television, mainstream documentaries. Public classrooms and textbooks are not sharing the new discoveries. So we have an entire generation of young people now who are being steeped in the false assumptions of science that have led to the problems that we're facing right now. And they're being asked to solve them through the same thinking. So my question that I've asked is, how can we possibly meet the issues of our time if we're not even honest about the issues? And we can talk about this as much as you like, but I'm going to share with you right now, you are not being given the facts of climate change. It's not what you're being told publicly. You're not being given the facts of the global economic meltdown. It's not being shared. I was in Zurich, and in Zurich it's common conversation. You get to this country, people don't even know about what is actually happening at the root of the financial system of the world. So it is a fact that we're living what is now being called a time of extremes. It doesn't mean they're bad things or good things, it just means they're really big things. And the thinking of the past will no longer work to solve the problems and the issues. And that opens the door to new possibilities. That's why we're speaking and sharing at the UN tomorrow. And one of the keys for me, and one of the principles, this is where it all comes together, is in the indigenous peoples that I've spent time with, the women and the men, the families, the elders.
Oh yeah, shut your cell phones and pagers.
The key for these people, they have been through times in their history very similar to what we're living through in ours right now. And if we have the wisdom, we can learn from what worked with them and what didn't, and the things that worked, do a lot of, and what didn't work, stop doing it in our time. Resilience is the word that comes up again and again. And when you talk about resilience in the Western world, the modern world, there's a sense that resilience, and it's actually defined as the ability to return to a normal functioning, or the ability to spring back after a traumatic event on a personal, a community, or a national or global event has happened. And that kind of resilience, we're all familiar with it. It's worked in the past. We've experienced it in our lives. There's an expanded form of resilience, and the Stockholm Resilience Center is pioneering a lot of the work with this. It's a way of thinking and living that makes room for the extremes in our lives each day, so we can thrive in the midst of the extremes because we have allowed for them in the thinking and living, rather than trying to live our lives as if this change is not happening and then acting surprised when something goes wrong, like a severe weather event. We're going to see the severe weather events because we are in a cycle of climate change that's here to stay, at least for our lifetimes. As a geologist, I can tell you the ice cores of Antarctica, I have no political agenda. So, and I have no academic credibility to defend. I can tell you exactly what those ice cores are saying to us, and it's not what we're hearing on mainstream. What you're hearing on the mainstream is a negotiated story. And they're quick to tell you that. It's a negotiated story that's left out some of the vital details. So the good news is that we already have all the solutions. For every major issue, all the big problems in our world, we have the solutions. And Bruce and I talk about this all the time. The greatest crisis, I think, that we're facing is a crisis in thinking that has yet to make room in our lives for the solutions that already exist in the world. We have enough food to feed every mouth of every human on this planet. Right now, there's no shortage. The food is not the problem. It's the politics and the thinking that won't allow it to get in the right places. We have forms of energy that produce no greenhouse gases, that are inexpensive, abundant, that could fuel every home of every human on the face of the earth that chooses to have power in their home. It's not the technology that's the problem. I think back, and I know most of you in this room are old enough to remember this. I remember John F. Kennedy gave a speech that changed my life when I was young. In 32 words, he changed the course of human history. And what he said is, we choose before the end of this decade to place a man on the moon and bring him back safely. I'm paraphrasing. And it happened even before the end of the decade. And people say to me all the time, they say, how did that happen so fast? How did they develop the algorithms for the trajectory, and how they learned to build spacesuits and the packages of Tang that all the astronauts were drinking? How did they do that so quickly and implement it in 10 years? And the answer is why I'm sharing this story right now. The technology already existed. No one in a position of authority and power had ever given a mandate for that technology to become a focus and accomplish a goal. And when then President John Kennedy, when he made that statement, it was the mandate unprecedented for the military complex, the civilian academic university complex, for corporations to free the money, banks to free the money in a way that had never been done before. And the reason I'm saying is because that's precisely where we are right now. It's not about going to the moon, but it's about alleviating the suffering of people in the world who don't have the luxury to be in the salon like we are because they're struggling for their life tonight. But the key for those people is that we have the ability right now to implement a transformation. It can be done quickly or it can be done gradually over a long period of time, but no one in the position of authority and power has yet to make it a priority in this world. And I'm not saying it has to be a president of the United States. I'm simply saying that the fact is, if it were a priority, we have what we need to do that now. Resilience is the key, and community and cooperation that we now know is the essence of nature itself. Nature shows us this model, and I know Bruce shares this so eloquently. When he looks at the cells, we want to see how the world works, Bruce will tell you all about the cells. So we're learning now, and people ask me all the time, they say, Greg, you think we made some big mistakes? I think it's more useful, personally, to think of ourselves as on this huge learning curve. And I think we've made choices in the past based upon what we knew, and they worked so well, they got us here. We're here now, so they worked. But now the world changed, and this is the last thing I'm going to say. The world changed, and no one has told us. There's been no special on BBC or CNN or the New York Times or some glossy magazine. And people all over the world now are clinging to an idea of the way things used to be and the way that they used to work in the world that used to be. And they're waiting for that world to return. And those are the people that are hurting and struggling right now because that world is gone. And because it has not been acknowledged in the mainstream, and this is something I think we all can, and Alan, you help with your films, doing this beautifully. Because it hasn't been acknowledged, we have never had the opportunity to mourn the passing of a way of life that we all have mastered, and in the same generation that we mastered it, it has disappeared. And in the mourning and the letting go, that is what frees us to embrace the new world, beautiful world, powerful world that's emerging. But unless that can be shared on a broad, general, mainstream basis with everyday people, they're still thinking that we're in a temporary world that's struggling, and they're waiting for the normal to come back, and they put their lives on hold. They're not, I know people, I tell this story in one of my books, they're not having babies, they're not buying homes, they're not sending their kids to school because they're waiting for things to get back to normal. And it's a normal that can never happen because that world is gone and no one told us. So our prayer, individually and collectively and through the work that Source of Synergy Foundation, synergy is what it's all about. That's why it's such a perfect name for your organization. And the Source of Synergy Foundation, I think, is a beautiful example of the kind of organization that is emerging that transcends the polarities and the differences. E.O. Wilson says this beautifully. He says the world from this point forward is going to be run by synthesizers. People that can take a lot of information from a lot of different places and make the right decisions at the right time and think critically about it. So it's no longer enough to be an expert in one field because the world doesn't know those boundaries. But we're being asked to draw from everything that we know and to synergize it in a way that we've never done before. So as the world changes in ways that we're not used to, faster than we've ever seen, our lives are changing as well. And we're all learning together. And this is where I think the synergy of the ancient and the indigenous wisdom married with the best science of today through community resilience is the key to bring us full circle. And that's where I'm going to stop right now. Thank you. 15 minutes. So ladies and gentlemen, please help me give a warm welcome. Give it up for Bruce. I love this man, obviously. No, what you don't know is he was a rock promoter, and I was a musician long before we were ever authors. So if this whole gig doesn't work out for us, we're going back to the music business. So just so you know.
I so appreciate that. I also appreciate, number one, being in this environment of Len and Emily's is infused and permeated with an energy of love, which we all know and we all feel. And that's really important because our love does permeate a structure and it does change the world, and it's a physical reality, which I am new to in my life in the last 20 years now. But what I'd like to talk about is that everything is on schedule. The world is falling apart right on schedule. And we have to understand this, that we've had a belief about what evolution was predicated on, and we always focus on the nature of genes. that we would see that genes were controlling the traits and characters, and as you go up the evolutionary scale, there's going to be more genes and more character and traits evolving from these genes. And it turns out this is totally false. The whole idea about genes has been a totally misunderstood belief system that we bought into, that genes control life. Genes control nothing. Genes are blueprints. That's exactly what they are. And why that's relevant is we've been focusing on the blueprints and giving them self-realization, that they make a decision, a gene turns on and a gene turns off. And it turns out this is totally false. And the problem with this belief system, because it permeates our structure of the world, is that people perceive themselves as victims of a world because their genes are controlling them and they can't control their genes, according to that belief. I was fortunate enough to be in the right place at the right time years ago. I was cloning stem cells about 46 years ago. There was just a handful of us in the entire world that even knew what the hell a stem cell was. I did this study, and it's just so brief and so profoundly important. I just want to say what it represented. I would isolate one stem cell, which is an embryonic cell. Stem cells are embryo cells. The moment before you're born, I could say, here's an embryo cell, and then a moment after you're born, I look at the same cell and say, now it's called a stem cell. So that's what it represents. And the reason we have stem cells, and all of you have them because you are here, is the fact that every day we lose, as Carl Sagan would say, hundreds of billions of cells are dying every day, and we have to replace them. So we are growing every day of our lives by necessity. If you stop growing, if you stop the stem cells, you'll die right off. That's what it's going to be about. So the point about it is we all have these stem cells, we have these embryonic cells. I'd isolate one cell, put it in a petri dish by itself. It divides every 10 or 12 hours, so after a week I have about 50,000 cells in the petri dish, but they all came from the same parent. So I had 50,000 genetically identical cells in the petri dish. The experiment that I did is just mind-boggling because it was so simple and profound, is I would take cells out of the master dish and put it into another petri dish and change the environment, the culture environment. Cells live in the equivalent of a synthetic blood that we make in a laboratory called culture medium. And by changing some of the composition of that culture medium, I put these cells from the main dish into this dish, and the cells form muscle. And I go back to the very same dish of stem cells, put them into a second petri dish with another environment, and they form bone. And I go back to the very same dish and put cells into a third petri dish with a different environment, and they form fat cells. Well, you're left with a very important and very profound question. What controls the fate of the cells? The answer, first of all, they were all genetically identical, so you can't invoke the genes as controlling this. It was the environment. My work on trying to understand how the environmental signals lead to the control of genes, which is now a new science since 1990. I saw this in 1967 and wrote about it, but it took 1990 until science recognized a new branch of science called epigenetics. And it's the most profound revolution in the world for a very important reason. When I say genetic control, it literally means control by genes. That's the belief, oh, genes cause this and genes cause that, which is false. Epigenetic sounds like the same thing, epigenetic control, but epi is the entire revolution that this planet will pivot upon. For the reason is this, the prefix epi means above. So when I say epigenetic control, then I'm literally saying control above the genes. Well, that becomes important because when we always look for control, we always go to the genes. Now we're saying, well, where's the control above the gene? It led me to an understanding of what's called the cell membrane, the skin of the cell. And the relevance is that the skin of the cell is an information processor. It reads the environment and it sends signals into the cell and to the genes to control the biology of the genes to live in an environment that's always changing. So the membrane is the nervous system of the cell. Just to let you know, in the development of a human, the outer layer of the embryo is called ectoderm, it's a skin. The skin gives rise only to two things in humans, skin and nervous system. So like the cell, our nervous system comes from this outer layer. Well, the significance about that, it led me to an understanding of how this cell worked and all that stuff, but it also led me to understand this. Evolution is, the way we perceive it, is a scale of increasing awareness. And so we make a whole evolutionary list. Oh, we start with bacteria, and then there are amoebas, and then there's worms, and then you get to, fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, mammals, blah, blah, blah. And we see this as one continuous process with imperceptible changes over billions of years. Well, that is a total misperception. The genes do not represent our evolution for a simple reason. the number of genes in a human, which is now, I think, 22,333, is essentially the same number of genes in one of the smallest organisms we work with in a genetics lab. A worm with 1,200 cells has the same number of genes. So basically, the number of genes did not give us the big difference, okay? So basically, we were looking at the wrong thing. It turns out it's this membrane of the cell where intelligence comes from. And the significance of that is the most primitive organisms on this planet are called bacteria. And they are the smallest little cells, and they have like a capsule. They look like little medicine capsules, a lot of them. And the problem with that is the membrane of a bacterium can only get so big because once it reaches the maximum inside this capsule, that's all you can have. So evolution started by creating the bacteria and then multiplying them and creating all different kinds of versions of bacteria, but they were all still limited by their inability to expand their membrane. So by definition, evolution stopped. It couldn't make a smarter bacterium. There was no way it could happen. But evolution saw another way, and the other way was called community. That bacteria started to live in community with each other and put a membrane around themselves. And so they had a closed world, and the bacteria exchanged jobs because there were different kinds of bacteria, and they all exchanged. They exchanged their DNA, and they lived in a community. So the community of bacteria, called a biofilm, is the precursor of the next level of evolution, which is called the amoeba. The amoeba is a community of bacteria living under a skin, okay? Well, then the next level of evolution is what? Make more and more amoebas with variations on a theme. An amoeba has thousands of times more surface area membrane than a bacterium does. So an amoeba is thousands of times more intelligent in its ability. Then comes an interesting part. So the next level, and this is first billion years was basically bacteria, and then the amoebas came in at the end, and then the next billion years or so, billion and a half years, was variations on all the amoebas, which are what? Communities of bacteria with a membrane around them. Well, what happened was this. The amoeba got to a size where it can't get any bigger. Simple reason. It's like a balloon. Once you put water in the balloon, a little bit of water, we can throw the balloon all around the room. But if you put too much water in a balloon, try to throw it, the membrane rips. Well, the membrane rips, the cell dies. What's the point? Even amoebas reached a maximum size where they couldn't create any more membrane and still be viable. Evolution stopped for the second time. And then what happened was the next level of evolution was amoebas got together and formed a community and put a skin around them. And so we, by definition, are a community of 50 trillion amoebas underneath our skin. And they make the society, because the amoebas are the living element. We, by definition, are a community. I'm a community. I'm not an individual. I got 50 trillion citizens living inside. And the relevance about this is very important. There's no new function in the human that's not already present in the amoeba. Amoebas have a respiratory, digestive, excretory, nervous system, neuroendocrine system, reproductive system. Amoebas have an immune system, okay? Relevance is this. A human is the highest level of that community of amoebas and reached its maximum ability for its brain and all the surface area of the brain with all the folds and gyri and so forth. That's increasing the surface area, but it maximized. The human represents another endpoint. And then what happens at an endpoint is the individuals come together in a community and form the next higher organization. The evolution that we are facing right now is the evolution of the next higher level of organization, where every human is a cell in the body of a superorganism that's forming, and that superorganism is called humanity. So we are coming together to create a new structure. The falling apart of the existing structure is a necessary requirement before the new structure can be built. We can't build it on the faulty foundation that Gregg mentioned, and both of us have it in our books. It's a faulty foundation. You can't survive with this way we've been living. So the falling apart of society is a necessary step in the evolution. Rather than to be feared, it should be welcomed, is because if we don't do it, the inevitable end is coming, because science has already told us we're going extinct. And that's because of the way we live with each other and the way we live with the planet has been destructive of the system. So we're on the edge of a system falling apart and a new system beginning. Well, this is where you come in very critically into this, because it's the formation of a community. Out of what and from who? Where's it coming from? We got 7 billion people. And so to give the analogy, which you've heard, but now it really makes sense if you understand it, a cell is a miniature human, as I said. It has all the functions. So I say, go inside the body of a caterpillar. And it's got, let's say, 7 billion cells in there, and they're all working together. Some of them they have different jobs. It's really important. Some do muscle work, some do digestion work, some do blood system work. They have jobs. They all work together in a community. And as a caterpillar is growing, the environment and the economy is booming. You know, it's growing, everybody's happy, everybody's working, everything's cool. And then it reaches a plateau where the caterpillar can't grow anymore. And that is a problem, a finite problem, because all these cells that were doing jobs like moving the caterpillar around or digesting the food, well, we're not moving, we're not even taking in any food. What does it mean? The system starts falling apart. Many of the cells actually commit suicide, which in biology is called apoptosis. And there's a complete dissolution of the structure. But what's most important about that is in the midst of this dissolution, there are specialized stem cells called imaginal cells. And imaginal cells carry a vision of a different world. They're genetically identical to all the other cells, but they carry a different vision of a world. What they do is they get in among all the cells that are falling apart and help them organize into the next higher structure, which is the butterfly. So the relevance of you being in this room, number one, you are the cultural creatives that represent the imaginal cells. It's your influence in the world that can help shape the new structure of the community that must evolve. If we don't form this, then it's a choice. We may not make it. We've been here before, and we didn't make it, but this is an opportunity. If we don't change, then science's prediction of extinction is actually real and looming. And yet there is this great chance, because the internet, which represents the development of the nervous system of humanity. It connects 7 billion cells into one living organism. And we have a new population called the millennial generation. The most important part about that millennial generation is they're not part of the structure. They bitch and complain, and rightfully so, that they can't seem to get started in this world, but they don't realize not getting started is the primary step of the next evolution for a simple reason. They don't, you tell a 20-something person that the stock market is going to crash, and they go, like I own a stock, right? I don't really care. And why that becomes important is they don't have a hold on the structure as it is. And there's now greater than 50% of them, which means less than 50% of the population is holding on to say, keep the structure the way it is, but they're getting, the population is diminishing. This is the foundation of what will cause a precipitation of the existing structure because they're not connected to it. And they come from a global vision. They're connected by internet to a global world. The issues that, if I, politically said like Republicans in the case of, the anger things that they have and their things, they were completely taken back by the population not following them, but not recognizing the young people they don't have a thing with race or with sex and all that kind of stuff, which are those other issues. They're global. And so their vision is really where the new vision is coming from. The falling down of the old one is necessary. So this is really exciting because it says we are on the verge of making something new. And in addition to that, there'll be one other factor besides the fact that, well, there's two factors for the evolution. I'll just say it very quickly, two factors. Number one, we are not victims of our health. 90-some% of ill health on this planet is now found to due totally to stress. It is not due to the biological malfunctioning. That in fact less than 5% of the population can even legitimately claim that their genetics are interfering with their life. So that means 95% of the people have a perfectly adequate genetic system, okay? We've been programmed to be victims, and the fact is, no, we are the ones that change the environment or perception of the environment. And since the environment that controls the cells, it doesn't make a difference if the cell's in a plastic dish or a skin-covered dish. It still responds to the environment. Our mind creates the chemistry, which is the foundation of the culture medium called blood. Your thoughts release different chemicals into the blood, and just as I change the culture medium in one dish to another dish, I change the fate of the cells. As you change your mind and change your perception, you change your own biology and genetics, which means you're all powerful, but you don't believe it because there's nobody to support it. This becomes really critical, and the other part is this: we've all been programmed. And this is the hardship that we face. And there's a movie called The Matrix. You may have seen people look for it in the science fiction part of the video store. It's actually a documentary. And the reason is simply this. We have been given the choice of take the blue pill and go back into the program, or take the red pill and get out of the program. They never really said what would happen if you got out of the program. And all of us have been programmed last trimester of pregnancy, first 7 years, is download. And the reason for the download is this. You cannot be conscious if you don't have data. In other words, I buy you a new iPod, you take it out of the box, I say push play, play is to create the playlist, created, conscious, let's say. I say push play on the new iPod, and nothing happens. So, well, why not? And the answer is you didn't put any programs to play from. First 7 years, nature designed the download. The download is a brain state of theta as a predominant brain state, which is hypnosis. So that children observe everyone around them and download the behavior without conscious filtering or conscious interpretation. It's just a recording. What their fathers, their mothers, their family, culture is doing is a download. And these then become the foundation of the database. Now, the issue is the conscious mind is us, our spiritual, our source, who we are. We are in the conscious mind. There's an entity in there. That's us, okay? And the conscious mind is the creative mind. The conscious mind has wishes, desires, and aspirations. The subconscious mind is the habitual mind. It just plays the programs that we got. Well, the issue is, why don't our lives match our wishes and our desires? And science is answering that simply by the fact that it recognizes that we only operate 5% of the time from our conscious minds. That means 95% of your life is coming from the subconscious programs, which means the behaviors that you represent 95% of the time are actually not even yours fundamentally. They were downloaded from other people. And as a result, we're not living the lives that we want to live. And we don't see it, and that's where the whole monkey wrench goes in the system. As I say in my lectures very quickly, I hope give me a minute here, I'm trying to get to the end of this. I say, go back to a time in your life, I know you had a friend, you were very close to your friend, you knew your friend's behavior very, very well, and you happen to know your friend's parent. And at one point you see your friend has some of the same behavior as their parent. So you volunteer something like, hey, Bill, you're just like your dad. And then you back away from Bill, who goes totally ballistic and says, how can you compare me to my dad? And most people are totally familiar with this. And I say, but this is a profound story. Everyone else can see that Bill behaves like his dad. The only one who doesn't see it is Bill. And there's a reason, scientifically. The conscious mind is thinking 95% of the time. And when it's thinking, by definition, it's not being mindful or paying attention. And as a result, the default shifts into the subconscious behavior. So now you're playing behavior that you don't see and comes from other people and sabotages ourselves, okay? So the programming is really where the problems come from. And the cultural programming is passed down the first 7 years unconsciously from generation to generation to generation, which presets your cancer. Children who are adopted into a family that has a lineage of cancer, the adopted child will get the same family cancer as much as any sibling would, but they came from totally different genetics. It's not the genes that did this, okay? Go back very quickly, and I'll just close it out because there's some interesting part about the story of the Matrix. It says, take the red pill and get out of the programming. And I would say, well, what would happen if you didn't go in, if you stopped operating from your programming? If you stayed mindful right now and stopped operating from the program, I'll tell you what happened because you've experienced it already in your life. If you ever fell in love, head over heels in love with somebody, this was the one time in your life where you don't default to the subconscious program. It's the beginning part of love. Is called the honeymoon. 3 things are very important about it. Number 1, you're extremely healthy. And the reason is love causes brain secretions in the culture medium that give health to the cells. People glow. They have tremendous energy when they fall in love. I always joke that they make love for days without stopping for food or sleep. They got so much energy. And I also come to this most important conclusion. When you ask people who are in that state of what I call the honeymoon effect, about life on this planet, to them at that moment it's heaven on earth. It's heaven on earth. And the fact was, well, that was not an accident or a coincidence. They created it from what? Conscious mind, wishes, desires, and aspirations. Then there's a tendency to lose it and falls apart. And the reason is, well, why did it fall apart? And the answer is, when life gets busy, you start to think. And the moment you start thinking, you default to the programs that you got from your parents and your community. Well, those behaviors were never part of the honeymoon. So when they're introduced, usually it's a shock to the other person to see that behavior show up. And this is where that, I love the phrase, "who are you?" comes out to their partner. And the fact is, then you have to go back to Bill's story. Bill didn't see he was playing the behavior, so he has no idea he has that behavior. So when a couple start to argue over the behavior that shows up and one doesn't even know they played the behavior, that's where the thing starts falling apart and compromises start coming in. Well, I accept that crummy behavior because we had this great honeymoon part, that was really good. But then another compromise and another compromise, and every time you compromise, the honeymoon disappears, quick, piece by piece by piece, until you say, no more compromises, relationship over, and then you stand there thinking, how did something so wonderful turn into this? And the answer was, it was wonderful when you operated from your creative, conscious mind and were mindful. And you lost it when the programs kicked in. So the world we're facing today is, in a conclusion, cosmic joke, if I would really look at it the way I love to see it, is that we've been programmed to believe that we die and then we go to heaven. My perception is a little different. I think we're born into heaven. And this is where we come to create. This is where we come to have experiences. When we die, we carry those with us, but not the opportunity to make more creations, because this is a virtual reality suit that, as I was saying earlier, when I wasn't spiritual. I had nothing to do with spirituality. I was doing genetics and molecules, all these things. And then I saw the nature of the spirituality, and it was a moment of my whole life changed. And the moment was when I asked myself, when I owned all of a sudden that I have a spiritual part to me and a physical part, and I asked myself, why have both? And the cells answered the question. With a question, I asked, why have both a spirit and a body? And the cells said this to me, Bruce, if you're just a spirit, what does chocolate taste like? And all of a sudden I realized that's a short way of saying all the experiences, the emotions, what you see with your eyes, what you hear with your ears, what you taste with your, what you feel and touch and smell, all of that is derived from this cellular machine that converts the sensations of our world into vibration, and the brain sends the vibration back to source. And I realized, biggest mistake of my whole life, because as males, what was the programming? Males were programmed not to be sensitive. Because if we were sensitive, then we were sissies. So we got to the point of how insensitive we can be. Well, hit me and see if I cry. That's the, that was the test. I'm so insensitive, you can hit me. And then, of course, we grew up in a world with all these women with all their sensitivity, because that's allowed. And they look at us going, how come they're so damn insensitive? And it's the programming. And the fact is, I wasted a lot of my life realizing that our business on this planet is experiential, and to go and be creative, and to manifest experiences you want to carry with you. And the group of the Synergy Foundation, you people all here, are creating experiences in this world, and you're at a level of your experiential creations are capable of influencing a large number of other people, because that's how it's going to spread. As people let go of the programming and move into personal creativity, we all create heaven on earth when we're in love. If we got rid of the program, by then definition, everyone would be manifesting their version of heaven on earth. And I think this is the destination that we're moving into, but the old structure is in a state of collapse with new thinking. And this is what Gregg and I emphasize about the new science, the new thinking that shapes the way we live. So we are definitely on the verge of the greatest possible step of human evolution ever, the coming together of a unity called humanity. And the synergy of 7 billion people coming together in the world of science leads to something called emergence. And emergence is things we couldn't even imagine right at this minute. When that many people come together, will pop out of our world. So there's a world that's so far beyond even our imagination at this moment, just looming on the horizon. And as Gregg said, all the answers that we need are here, and when this comes together, it will completely turn this planet into heaven on earth, which it rightfully is. Thank you for your attention.
dialogue with everybody. So we wanted to
I'm gonna
open
cut
up
under the tree.
Yeah, no, this is branches.
I
Sort of.
have the mic, so it's easy.
Get the mic on your boot.
I'm the mic on the boot. So, all of what you both say, I have in me, and I've had in me over a decade, and many of these wonderful people probably are terribly aware. How? You say, both are saying, at a community level, so you're saying in our smaller little realms to create whatever we can. I do energy work. I went to Stanford. I'm trying to change Stanford to accept. Gregg was gracious enough to say, I'll waive my fee. You probably forgot you said that, but you did say that. And I tried for the last few years to try to get a place for Gregg to speak. I went through religious studies. Friend, Dean of Religious Studies, Provost, friends. Where can we put a dialogue together? Because I feel, perhaps with my education background, that if we get to the kids, this next generation, that's where it's going to happen with the greatest speed. So I have been unsuccessful.
Three questions.
I have been unsuccessful.
No, I don't think you've been successful.
I mean, I keep trying, but I'm just saying the nuts and bolts of how. I mean, I know some of the most prominent MDs. I am their healer. They haven't referred 2 people to me because I'm their secret. You know, so you know, how? I keep trying to get the big people and the big, and I'm the little secret. So I'm really truly asking from my heart, how do I make it a bigger, not a secret?
There's this old hippie thing from some years back, and it was, before you go out and save the world, take care of the backyard. And this is our issue, because if we want to go out and take a flag and get in the front, it's not going to work that way at all. It's going to work from the back, it's going to work from behind the scenes, it's going to work by presenting such a model to other people that they want to know. I refer to it as the Sally met Harry part in the restaurant where the woman faked the orgasm and the other woman said, I want what she's having. And basically that is what applies here. If you start living healthy, you start being happy, and people around you are going to go, so what'd you do? But if we try and take that to the head of the Stanford University, it's a complete waste of time.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you, Bruce. I agree. You'll never convince or persuade other people because they're clinging to an idea of a world that no longer exists. However, because that world is buckling and in some cases collapsing, there is an openness to new ideas. And I think Buckminster Fuller said this so beautifully. I just have so much respect for him. Of the many things he said that were so brilliant, he said, you'll never change the world by fighting the existing reality. He said, if you want to bring about change, find a new way to do things, and everyone will do it that way. You don't have to fight the old reality. You create the new reality, and everyone just gravitates it and begins doing it that way. And this is why I think the language of science, Bruce and I were both trained in science. And a lot of people, they hear the word science and their eyes glaze over. They want anything to do with it. Science doesn't have to be complicated. Humans make it complicated. Nature is simple. It's as complex as we choose to make it. We live in a very simple world. If you're going to reach, this is a choir, and we know we're talking to the choir. So if you're going to reach beyond the choir, you have to find a language that is respected, that's trusted, and that is neutral. And science is a language if the science is kept honest. And what's happening right now is that science has been hijacked by money, by power, by greed, and by habit in many college professors. When a new discovery is made, they say, I've taught the old way for 40 years. And they believe that to teach what the new discovery has shown invalidates their career, when I don't think that's the case at all. It's a way of honor. Bless you. Bless you. You can sneeze. It comes in threes. So for these reasons, science can only serve us if we keep science honest. Right now, science is being hijacked. It's being hijacked when it comes to climate change, when it comes to the medical community. And I think part of our job is to do precisely that, to keep science honest and allow it to serve us in the way that we have asked. So if we can share these ideas at the UN, or Bruce and I have had the opportunity to speak to government officials in other countries. It's useful to do that from the top down, but where the real change is coming is from the bottom up. And we have very good models for this. Much of the extreme that we're seeing in many of the circumstances are unsustainable systems that are breaking down. But we don't have to guess what that looks like, because the world gives us a laboratory of real-life examples. Cuba, post-Soviet Union, and maybe some of you have studied this, is a perfect example. It was an artificial peak oil and peak debt and peak food scenario. When they were cut off from the Soviet Union, they had a blockade from America. Those people had nothing. And what they figured out, the form of resilience based upon decentralization, going back to local communities, some of the communities, a handful of people, some of them were entire neighborhoods, was so successful that even now, the Cuban government, they've changed their motto from socialism or death to a new world is possible. That is their new motto, a new world is possible. And they did it based on the community resilience. And there are, I'll just give you a true story. I mean, just to bring us into everyday experience. The economy is buckling, people are losing jobs, industries are collapsing, and we see that. Maybe you're affected by it, friends, neighbors, we've all seen it. My wife and I live in a rural area in northern New Mexico, north of Taos. If you know where Taos is, we're north of that. And we have a friend who is a builder of ecologically sound homes. 30 years he had a business. He employed over 35 people. And he took on the biggest project of his life, and he did it in the year 2008. And you know what happened in 2008. Not only did the economy collapse, but the housing industry collapsed. And he lost his ability to take care of his family, for all those people. And his name's Ken. And Ken woke up in the middle of the night, and he said, what is the most important thing for people? And he said, this is the way he tells the story. He said, you know, people don't need houses anymore. They can't afford houses, can't afford to buy them. He said people need to be able to grow food, and they need to be able to take care of themselves. He took the skills that he learned as a builder, but he recognized the world no longer needs what he was building. And rather than trying to recreate that, which is the old world, he said, the new world, the new normal that's emerging, what do people need now? And he began to design, prototype, and build a new series of modular raised bed systems that can be as small as 12 inches square on a patio in New York, or they can be 4 feet by 8 feet, multiple systems. They're self-watering, they feed themselves. They have covers that allow the food to be grown 12 months out of the year, even 30 and 35 degrees below zero in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And Ken is having so much fun building these modular systems that help people take care of themselves. He'll never build another home. And it's a perfect example because he changed the question. And this is where I'm going with this. And this is, I think, the answer to your question. In the false assumptions of science of separation, we all have asked, consciously or subconsciously, when we make a decision, a relationship, a job, a career, whatever it is, we're asking, what can I get from the world that exists if I make this choice or this decision? And that question made sense in the false assumption of separation. But now we know that nature is based upon unity and connection. The question has to change. And the new question, rather than what can I get from the world that exists, is what can I give to the world that's emerging, or what can I share, or what can I contribute? And the way people answer that question opens the door to vast possibilities that change their entire lives. And Ken asked that question. He said, what can I contribute? My skills as a builder, how can that support the new world in my community that's emerging? He wasn't trying to push homes off on people that he knew how to build. He said, but I'm a good builder, man. I'm good with my hands. He's a friend of mine. We talked about this. He said, well, what can I build? And so he now is teaching people to feed themselves, and he ships these things all over the world. And that is a perfect example of changing the question. And I think that's the answer to what can we do. And as we do it locally, rather than trying to change this hierarchy, as people begin to adapt these ideas of local energy, local economy, local food, garden to table, local bartering, that changes the system from that point up. And at some point, because the people up here are also our neighbors, they begin to look and say, maybe we need to think differently about this.
Greg, I wanted to suggest a couple examples too of actually how the hierarchical situations change. I was telling Bruce, I just came back from the Science and Non-Duality Conference in California, and Bruce has been there in the past. It was very big this year, and the quantum physics component was huge. Now, my background, for those who don't know me, is I'm retired from 30 years in evolutionary biology at the American Museum of Natural History. But the point is that the discussion out in California, which I found fascinating, and there were division heads there from Harvard, there was a guy there from CERN, so it's very well-positioned people now, as opposed to people who in the past, with this message, have been more marginalized. They're basically saying that the conventional empirical data is showing that there's a huge part of the entire way things work that are not conventionally empirical, period. And they're discussing then, because science at its best, if it's kept honest, like you said, they're curious, and they're saying, what do we do with this now? What do we do when the empirical data shows that even maybe 96% of the system is non-empirical? Then they say, well, the fact that it's not conventionally empirical doesn't mean it's not scientific. Because if you're talking about probability curves and numbers and stuff like that, you're talking about things that science can deal with, but not in the boxes that thought a gene was real, that thought an atom was real. And they're grappling with this across the room at a much higher level now. So that's example one. Second example is, and I always say this because of what's in it, I'm editing a book now for Yale University Press that could not have been done 5 years ago because certain people were not allowed into the conversation, and it was along with what Bruce said. To deal with some of the things we're dealing with, we really have had to invite people in who do complexity theory from like Santa Fe Institute, and what they're about, is what Bruce was pointing to, is an epiphenomenon, that there's something other than just the reductionist components that are driving the system. 5 years ago, you were told, no, you can't have them in the book because that's quasi-science. And the people from the conventional places who were already in the book would not even pick up the phone to talk to them. But what's interesting now, because of the way the data, particularly the epigenetic data, is driving the conversation, then the fellow who's, let's say, the main geneticist at Harvard has had to pick up the phone and have an interesting conversation with the woman from Santa Fe Institute, where the conversation now is not, oh, you're not even science. Now it's, that's interesting. And that's because the data is showing things that can't be dealt with by the conventional paradigm. And that's exciting.
And the world is showing things. They're trying to now identify what it is that we're actually living. And I think the change will happen in the world before it's actually recognized and acknowledged in a lot of the mainstream. They'll be forced to acknowledge it. And that's why I think it's not so... Both Bruce and I had to make choices. We have very different lives. Bruce was in academia. I want to speak for you, but in the university environment. I made a choice to... I was broke. I ran out of money in the university. I went to work in the industry during a crisis. And originally it was an energy crisis. Then it was the nuclear crisis, the Cold War, and I worked in defense. And then the information crisis, and I worked at Cisco. And when we both began writing, we both had to make a choice from our experience. Do we go through the academic, peer-reviewed route, where the work will take 6 years plus to be published, and very few people will see it, or do we research this very, very well and take it to the mainstream? And as new discoveries come to light, we update our work. And both of us, we didn't have the conversation together. We both opted to do that. And one of the reasons is because the world will change before I think it's acknowledged in the mainstream. That's what makes it so interesting.
I wanted to follow up with a question for you both about what we do with the internet. So Bruce, you mentioned that you thought this was the new membrane. And at the same time, the internet, one might say, is, at least for millennials and perhaps many others, something that's dominated by Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, ways that involve really sort of ego-based thinking in many instances, where maybe the programming is sort of coming to the fore. And so I'm wondering, how do we use the internet or get the internet to operate in a way that we get out of ego-based thinking, where people are like, here's me, here's my life, me, like, into a way that gets beyond the programming?
First of all, young people have been evolving. Who is young now and where their brain consciousness is different. And if we create environments for them to reflect to each other, they're fully aware of who they are as a soul and their purpose, and they don't go through all the ramifications of who are my parents, what are their values and whatnot. They know who they are, they get that, and then they begin to act on it. But they see the internet as the ability to go from the global mind into the global heart. It just hasn't evolved yet. But they know that once that vibration is higher, they will experience that unity. And in that unity, there'll be a change, and that will affect all of life.
I think it's a learning curve. I think it's so new that this is part of the learning curve, the evolutionary process. It was new, and so everybody's saying, hey, look at me. And as we evolve beyond that, we've already looked at you. Now what? A perfect example of this, I was just talking to Dr. Hertak about this. Last time I was on the Tibetan Plateau, which is difficult to get into now. There were a group of Chinese students that were in a monastery about 16,000 feet above sea level that engaged us. There wasn't anybody else there except them and the monks and us. And they said, where are you from? And we said, from the States, and that they wanted to try their English. So we had this conversation, and I said, where are you from? And they said, we're from Beijing. And I said, what are you doing here? And they said, we were told that Tibet is a fairy tale, that these places don't exist, and they're telling us not even to consider this as part of our history any longer. And I said, well, why are you here? And they said, because of the internet. They said, we keep seeing Tibet on the internet. We wanted to see for ourselves. And I said, so what do you think so far? And they said, well, first, they said, you Americans aren't as bad as they told us you were. They said, you're actually pretty nice. So the internet is playing that role. The key is to keep it open and honest. And you know, there are efforts, and successful efforts, to shut down the internet, or to filter the internet in certain parts of the world. And our country is not immune to that. There are bills that are up for the vote right now. They're taking a backseat to health care, but to really limit how the internet is used. And we're all going to have to... The problem is, a lot of times the bills are passed before we know anything about it. And that's where... And people ask me this all the time. They say, what's a good source of information? Where do you get your news? And I have to say, honestly, I have yet to see a single source of unbiased reporting. You have to really make an effort and put the energy and the time into researching. But what I will say is the pictures are the same in the news all over the world. The commentary is what changes. So when you're looking at feeds coming out of Russia, for example, or out of Asia about something that's happening on the global stage, and then you tune into CNN or Fox, you know, or something, it's a whole different story. So, for example, we were just in Zurich, and the big story is that the dollar is on its way out as a reserve currency of the world. That's going to change all of our lives. And I called and asked people here, and our bank didn't know. He said he was angry. He said, "Don't even talk about that." I said, "That's crazy." And I said, he says, "How come I don't know anything about this?" And I said, "Where do you get your information?" Because it's common knowledge. When I was there when the G20 was happening. And it was common knowledge that they said that the dollar will be probably by, I mean, we'll still have a dollar among us, but as a global reserve currency.
Will it be replaced by the yen?
Yuan and probably a basket of currencies, but the countries are saying, why should we pay? This is what triggered, this is one of the catalysts for the Arab Spring, and that's where this whole thing happened. Was the dollar is so weak, and commodities are traded in dollars, so oil and food. And to us, you say, you know, what's the big deal if rice goes up $5 a bushel? Well, if you live in Cairo, and you only make $25 a month and you need 2 bags of rice, it's a huge deal. And all of a sudden the price of your main staple is beyond the reach of your family, and people are in the streets saying, government, fix this, and by the way, let's get a new government. But it wasn't so much about freedom, because Mubarak had been there. I spent a lot of time in Egypt. He'd been there over 40 years, and it worked. But when it stopped working, people couldn't afford homes, energy, and food. That's when they took to the streets. And our currency is, but you're not hearing about that here. So at least not openly.
So we're like the imaginal cells in a sense, and once we build the new organism and have the new structures in place, there's something that's, you know, framing that. But what does the future also look like that the imaginal cells can't even see? I mean, you're bridge builders. So anyway, that's sort of a putting that. But what's on the other side as a kind of pure, good world that we can come into? Okay.
I would like, Alan, to talk to that for a second, because that's the most important part. It's like, where the hell do we go? Because we've tried all these things, it's not necessarily working. And then I want to go back to this wonderful old saying from God knows how long ago, the answers lie within. And here's where the answers lie. As I said, every cell is the equivalent of a miniature human by function, needs, drives, and desires. What our needs are based on what the cells need. So we're living for the cells in that regard. Well, what's interesting about it is if you look inside under the skin, there are 50 trillion citizens. They have jobs. They all have jobs. They all get paid. There's an economy in that system. There's a social organization. There's protection, like immune health care protection, okay? All of the things that we have to deal with in our world, they had to deal with already. So for nearly 1 million years, you've got a cooperative venture of 50 trillion cells that have learned how to live in harmony with each other and share a very small world very efficiently. The future is biomimicry. The idea is if you understand how the cells do this, then all of a sudden you have a platform and a pattern that we must conform to, because nature worked this out long before we figured out who we are. You know, that was already done. And if in 1 minute, if I can, compress, what about the economy? Because that's a big issue we're facing. Well, here's the interesting thing about the economy of the body. The concept of wealth does not exist in the body until every cell is covered with the basics. Every cell gets food, shelter, protection. That's given. Once that is reached by a body, the extra energy that comes in is the wealth of the system. It's beyond what was basic. At first, the cells can collect the wealth because the energy is stored as physical units, coins called ATP. So there's a storage of ATP. And cells can acquire. But interesting, not like Bill Gates, where you can have so much beyond anything you could ever imagine. Cells have a physical limit of how much money they can hold, so to speak. When that limit is reached, the extra money is put into the community bank, which I happen to have a wonderful bank. And the significance of the community bank, it's not for the individual, it's for the entire evolution and development of the community. You can't have a child unless the bank is satisfied that there's already enough proceeds in there to build the next edition and all that. You break a leg, the liver doesn't say, well, what the hell, I'm not the leg, why are you taking my money to fix the leg? So basically, it says, what are we doing wrong? The answer is this: well, we have a major portion of the population doesn't even have the basics of life. So the first thing is this: how can you say we have wealth when we have people that have nothing? And yet there's enough to give them that basic stuff, and there's enough for individuals to make a profit for their own personal lives, and there's enough for the world to make a profit for the world, and put all this together. And this is so fundamentally important because there's a new way of sharing wealth. And it's a win-win-win situation. Everybody wins in this situation, and that's what a healthy body is all about. And so when we look out on the outside, say, what the hell can we do? And I say, the answers have already been done. Every technology that we're trying to do, the cells have already managed it. They can manifest energy, and they can store energy, and they can clean the environment. I mean, look what the amazing system of filtering the garbage that we live in, called the air and all that stuff. And filter, clean, maintain the temperature and all that at a most efficient level. And that's why we don't have to go look for how to do it. We just have to look at those that have already done it and then make the pattern from that.
Yeah, and what Bruce is saying is that the organism determines what its future looks like. And I think that's exactly what's happening, and the UN initiatives are part of that. just finished a new book. It comes out in January. There's a section on the book about just this. If you ask, I did this. I had a seminar, 1,000 people in the room, and I said, in the last few minutes of the seminar, what would you like the new world to look like? Thinking it'd be a quick conversation. We ended up staying 4 hours over because everyone walked up to the mic and everyone had a different vision, and that's the key. How do you create a world where everyone's vision is so very different? And what I learned very quickly is that the vision that people have for the new world is the healing of everything that has hurt them as individuals. It's very interesting.
That only gets us to ground zero.
Well, no, because the medical people, they have a vision of a world where everyone has access to benefit from the opportunities of the new technology that's been developed. Scientists in the room said we get to share the potential of everything that already exists in the lab. So it was interesting to see that. The UN has an initiative that was launched January of this year. It's called My World Initiative. And it is it's a website that's up and running now. It runs up until through 2015. And what they're asking is for people, they give 16 criteria for people to check off 6 of those 16 to tell them what is most important in the world for them. And although it's not finished yet, what has been compiled, it's compiled on a dynamic basis. If you go on right now, it looks different than it did this morning. And the first 7 criteria, the different age groups are all in agreement of what they would like the better world to look like. Number 1 was education for everyone. It's very interesting how this is coming out. So that is kind of a grassroots image coming up. Top level coming down. University think tanks. And in DC, there is a think tank made of non-governmental organizations that put together what's called an NIC, National Intelligence Committee. Every incoming president gets an encapsulated view from the best minds of the world of what those minds believe the world and the hotspots will look like for the next 15 years. And where this president's, whatever the president is, where their decisions are going to fit, or where the potential hotspots are. And so you look at the academics, the universities, the think tanks, the governmental organizations, and where these are coming together. It's very interesting to see how they're coming together to create the world as we move forward. But what I'm saying is the changes are happening so quickly that people are responding faster than the organizations can keep up with it. And it's happening by, and there are very specific steps. So in a longer program, we can get into it. The specific steps to create personal resilience, and where that personal resilience transforms into community, and even national, international resilience, not to spring back from the tough times, but to live and think in a way that makes room for the changes that we're having right now. And bits and pieces of those are being implemented. And one of those is decentralizing energy and decentralizing the production of food, so that we're not dependent on a food source half a world away. The carbon footprint it takes to get it there, and the disease that comes from that food. We know the people that grew it. It's grown 2 hours away from the place that we're eating it. And in northern New Mexico, the rural areas, and I know here in New York, it's very common for that to happen. So if we look, we've got some good models. If you haven't checked it out, check what happened to Cuba right after the collapse of the Soviet Union. It's a perfect laboratory for what we are entering now. We don't have to guess. Check Muyambo, Ethiopia, when climate change collapsed the way they live, and they learned to move from growing beef and exporting that to an agricultural society. They all became healthier. There was a lot of doubt that it would work, and once it began working in one place, everybody wanted to do it. And now the Ethiopian government is trying to replicate that program all across Ethiopia. So we're not completely in the dark. We've got examples. And our ancestors lived through the climate change that we're living through now, 5,000 years ago at the beginning of what we call civilization. And we know what worked and what didn't work for them if we're willing to embrace what the archaeology shows us. So, long answer to a short question.
So we'll take one, how about these last two, because it's already 8:30.
Oh, way past our UN bedtime.
So you began your answer, this last answer, by saying God knows. So I want you to address God, and in the context of consciousness and the environment. And as you know, many religious leaders are now involved in conscious changes in the environment. Help put together the World Charter. And
basically, this whole understanding of the cell membrane took me from a non-spiritual person to a spiritual person in an instant, because the first thing I recognized is why no two people are biologically the same. We cannot exchange cells with each other because your immune system recognizes what's called self. And I said, so where's the self? And it turns out the self is due to a set of antennas, protein antennas on the surface of the cell. It's like a large combination lock. No two people have the same set of antennas. The significance about that is if I take my antennas off by cells, they're called, many of them are called self-receptors, receivers of self. And the significance, if I take them off my cells are generic. They have no identity to them. I can implant them to anybody, they won't be rejected. And if I transfer somebody else's self-receptors on my cell, then it's not mine, it belongs to them. But the whole question is, where's the self coming from? You say, well, these antennas, and it's like, well, that's the conventional material mechanical worldview. And the fact is, no, these are antennas. They're receivers of a signal from the field. So each one of us is a piece of a field, a human field, so to speak, like a giant radio band where you can turn from one station to the next, moving the needle down. Each one of us is like a different station on a giant band. But all of us are part of the radio frequency, that one frequency, that's part of the field. And the relevance about that is that we are the field incarnate in this physical thing. But if we die, which is the most important understanding for my life, was I did the broadcast, the field didn't get lost, just this body. I can get another body in the future when another embryo shows up with the same set of antennas and I'm back, but in a different body and a different world and whatever's going on. So I come and go all the time. But then you say, so where the hell is the God or the control? And then I would go one step back to Albert Einstein's quote, which is a profoundly important quote. And the quote is, the field, which means the invisible energy, the field is the sole governing agency of the particle, matter. So basically, the field, the invisible energy, which we are, becomes the sole governing agency of the physical realm of which we are, which is actually foundational quantum mechanics understanding. Consciousness is creating this from a field. And so that, if you want to say what was God, then I say, well, the collective field is God. Each one of us is a piece, but not the whole. And when we leave the physical body, we can go back into the field and become merged with the field again, or be selected out of the field by another set of antennas on a different entity coming in. So we are part of that God. And that we're here to take that field and download it and manifest it here. And that's where the wisdom over the years has been accumulating of downloading from this field, and why you are in this room, because the wisdom you've downloaded over the years has put you in a position of imaginal cell potential, because of the wisdom you carry and the influence that you can use in extending that wisdom. So that whole concept of, I'd be very important, just close with this for me, it's not religion, so far away from that. It's spirituality, and that we are spirit, and no one can take it away, no one can sell it to you, which they've been doing for all these years, or threaten you with disconnection. That is not possible at all. That is the disempowerment of a population. And when people recognize who they are as creators. And as I said, so what did you do when you didn't have the programming? You did create heaven. You did. And the fact is, that awaits us as a mass population. But that takes awareness. And the forces to be have either imprisoned us with a belief of science as victims of our genes, or the belief of religion that God is somehow disconnected, and if you pay the right people, you get in good with it, and when people own personal responsibility, which is the hardest thing in the world, because we've never been programmed to recognize our personal responsibility and what unfolds in and outside of our lives, because we are manifesting it, we are creating it. And when we're doing it right, we glow, and other people want exactly what you have.
I think what Bruce is saying, what the studies are showing, actually religion is in decline right now, but the rise of spirituality is unprecedented. And I think people are beginning to make this distinction between religion is the rules and the dogma that are wrapped around a pre-existing relationship between us and our world and one another. The spirituality predates the religion. And I think people, many, not 100%, but in many cases, they're looking for ways to cut through the rules and the dogma to the deepest truths of our relationship to ourselves and the earth. And it mirrors what science has discovered as well. So I think this is why some of the indigenous traditions appeal to so many people, because it empowers us for a direct relationship with our world, with one another, with the field that you're talking about, the healing of our own bodies, whereas many of the religions have asked us to judge one another and have helped us to feel separate from our earth, from our own bodies, and from a higher power, and that simply isn't working for a lot of people.
Or they're finding they're finding the kernel of spirituality that has always been in what's called religion. It's just religion.
Buried pretty deep. Yeah,
well,
it
you know,
was
the same thing with science.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, I think that's true, and all the things we're talking about. I think it's important to bear in mind. The only things that are buckling and collapsing are the things that are unsustainable. And one of the things Bruce and I talk about a lot, does everything have to break before we have something new, or can we recognize that it's buckling and integrate the new into our lives so that the people that can afford it the least don't have to suffer the most? And that's my perspective. I think organizations like this, I think we can bring new ideas into people's lives before everything absolutely bottoms out, because they're the people that can least afford to have they don't have the cushion and the buffer to deal with those things, and I think it's important to work toward that. Yeah, so that's
it. I'll be brief. So it seems to me that there's a conditioning that almost has more control, at least collectively, than the innate wisdom of wanting to be an ever-expanding, omnipresent awake. So then the innate wisdom of wanting to be an ever-expanding, omnipresent awake. So what's the key to unlocking this subtle conditioning that seems to have so much of the collective locked up?
The most important understanding is that the subconscious programming that runs us 95% of the time and came from others is rewritable. But there's a process to rewrite it. And it's not, the two minds, this is where we confuse. Conscious, subconscious, one thing working together. If you educate the conscious mind, the subconscious mind should know all about this. And it turns out completely false. The two minds are separate from each other. The conscious mind is creative. It learns in a completely different way than the subconscious mind. So you can read a self-help book, go to a lecture, watch a video, just go, aha! And the creativity of the conscious mind will take that data and incorporate it. So our conscious minds are really very, very smart. But that data does not translate into the subconscious because that's not how the subconscious learns. Subconscious learns in two primary ways. Hypnosis, first 7 years, and then habituation, everything after that. So if you want to change, educating the conscious mind is nice. That gives you a direction that you want to help move your subconscious into, but just educating the conscious mind in no way influences the subconscious program, which is the greatest irritation of people because their conscious minds are so aware of, my God, my life could be so much better than it is. I got all this knowledge, and how come I'm still here? And the answer is that knowledge only works when you're mindful, meaning you've taken the red pill, you're not using the subconscious, then you employ that knowledge and you manifest heaven on earth. That's the honeymoon. And yet, if you think that's going to change the subconscious, it won't necessarily do it. But if you can sustain a honeymoon long enough, it becomes a habit. And when it becomes a habit, it will rewrite the subconscious programming to manifest a honeymoon for the rest of your life. And that's really the goal and the orientation of where we want to go. So if you can stay mindful long enough, then by doing the behavior that you wish, desire, aspire to, and you repeat it because you're staying mindful, repetition is what the subconscious learns from. And then, fortunately, because we're running out of time, not just in this room, but in the world, there's a whole new field of belief change modalities that involve super learning processes. So you can rewrite subconscious beliefs in 10 minutes. You can rewrite a belief that's limited you your whole life in 10 minutes. But that's understanding a new access process, which involves right-left brain integration, synergy, and when you do that,
from the great wisdom traditions.
yeah, oh yeah, well that's where it came from. So, but it's an opportunity. It says, God, we can do this really fast, but this is again not supported by conventional world because they have too many drugs to sell, and they're not ready yet for even bringing this in.
It's not, but crisis is the catalyst on the collective level. Crisis is a catalyst for evolution. And what's different about our time, we're really good at solving one crisis at a time. The Great Depression, we got that figured out. Rebuilding Europe after World War II and Japan, you know, we can do that. We've never faced the realities of climate change converging with the collapse of a global economy, converging with the end of the energy as we have known it and our civilizations depended on. Three things converging right now. That is creating an openness and a willingness to embrace new ideas and new possibilities that I didn't see 10 years ago. And that may be, in terms of Psych K, that may be the opening.
And the health crisis. I mean, as Bruce's information gets out and yours, that in fact we're not victims of our health crisis, we're creators of it. That also is affecting everybody. That's
all of these things are converging. There are crises and there are sub-crises that are linked to them, but the fact they're all converging in the same window of time is the open door that makes now so very, very different. And that's why now I think it's an opportunity to introduce. There's a willingness to at least entertain new ideas that I've never seen in my lifetime. I know didn't exist in the early part of the 20th century. So that's why this is important, right?
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Just wanted to congratulate both of our speakers for giving the bottom line, which is positive thinking and strategy. And both of you are excellent models of what teamwork must be about in going beyond this negativity, this electronic seance we see through the multimedia of seeing only negative situations rather than positive answers that are here with us. In essence, we are the cosmic DNA waking up to really live the blueprint of life as co-creators. We wanted to thank both of you for all of the work that you've done worldwide to make really Mother Earth as our schoolhouse of the future.
So we're not completely over yet, but we just really want to thank Gregg and Bruce for their presence and for inspiring us. And our homework is to rewrite our programming. We're going to go home and do that. And Deborah deserves a round of applause because